Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Paris, the city of light. Paris, the city of love and the capital of fashion. And right now, the eyes of the world is focused on this world-renowned city as athletes from all corners of the world have come together for this, the 33rd edition of the Summer Olympics. At the time of this recording, close to 11,000 athletes from 206 different countries are competing in 329 different events, including the usual events that you see in the summer games such as track and field, gymnastics, swimming, and the like, as well as new events such as surfing, men's field hockey, and making its debut in these Olympics, breakdancing. Now this marks the third time in the Olympic movement, which began in 1896, that the Summer Olympics are being held in Paris. And if it's anything like the other two games, we're in for quite a treat. Hello once again, I'm Dana Augusta, your host of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, the sports history podcast you didn't know you needed, as we give you the best of sports from back in the day. In this edition of the show, it is part 2 of our Historically Speaking Sports Podcast Olympic Special. And in this episode, we'll look back at the other two instances that the games were held in the city of Paris. One of them is celebrating actually its 100th anniversary. Later in the show, we'll take a look at some of the most controversial moments in Olympic history, including the 100-meter final in the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, the 1972 basketball final between the United States and the Soviet Union, and also a controversy that dates all the way back to 1912. And rounding out the show is our famous shout-out segment. As you will recall, there are two instances that happened on television during the Olympic Games that had brought me to tears. The first I talked about in the most recent episode when Muhammad Ali lit the Olympic cauldron in Atlanta, but before that in Barcelona, it was what happened to a British sprinter who finished last in his race and ultimately was disqualified, but it was one of the most moving moments in perhaps of any sporting event I had ever seen. We have all of that and more coming up on this, the part 2, the second part of our Olympic special here on the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast here on the Sports History Network.
The Pigskin Tales Podcast is all about the lesser-known pro football players. Yes, there are stories about the ones we know, like Brad Tarkenton and Harold Red Grange. But have you ever heard of Ernie Nevers? How about Dave Osborne or even Grady Alderman? These men created their own path to the NFL. How did they do it? Listen to the Pigskin Tales Podcast, now streaming on your favorite music platform. Go to pigskintales.com.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of our Olympic special here on the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast here on the Sports History Network. And every 4 years, as a sports fan as well as a history buff on all things in and out of sports, I look forward to the Summer Olympics. Now, from my perspective and offering my humble opinion, the Olympics is the one event that brings together the entire planet. I can only imagine that the importance of the Olympic Games, both in sports and politically, cannot be overstated. I can also only imagine that no one that was connected to the Olympic Games of 1900 could have ever conceived that the Games would be so big and so important for the athletic brotherhood across the globe. Now, 124 years ago, the second Summer Olympics took place in Paris, just 4 years after the Olympics were resurrected and held in Athens. And beginning on May 14th of 1900 and lasting until, good grief, October the 28th, the second Olympic Games were held for the first time in Paris. And with everything that is new, like the Olympics were at the dawn of the 20th century, they did some things that would seem strange to fans of Olympics today. For one thing, the few actual medals that were handed out were rectangular in shape instead of the traditional round gold, silver, and bronze. There was also no opening, closing ceremonies of these games in 1900, and these games was also the first to be held in a non-leap year. The only other occasion that the Olympics were held in a non-leap year was the last one in Tokyo, when the Olympics were held in 2021 instead of 2020 because of the COVID-19 outbreak. The 1900 Games, as you would see 4 years later in St. Louis, were held in conjunction with that year's World's Fair, also in Paris. In all, 1,200 competitors took part in 19 different sports, and many of the athletes, some of whom won events, they were unaware that they were actually taking part in the quote-unquote Olympics. Just to show you that in the minds of the sporting public, and in this case the athletes, the Olympics were not that big of a thing. That was the reason why it was only hosted during the World's Fair. Pierre de Coubertin, known as the father of the modern Olympic Games, said, "Holding the Olympics during the Paris World's Fair would be a great way to get the word out about the Olympic Games." Also, the 1900 Paris Olympics were notable because it marked the first time that women were allowed to participate. In the 1 to 2 ton sailing event, Helene de Poudelet became the first female Olympic champion. 2 months later, yes, 2 months, because those Olympics lasted for 5.5 months. Charlotte Cooper of the UK became the first woman to win an individual Olympic event in singles tennis. Cooper would go on to win in the mixed doubles tournament as well. Now, remember those rectangular medals I talked about earlier? Well, those medals were awarded in certain events. Most of the winners in the 1900 Olympics, instead of medals, were given cups and trophies. And there were some events that were contested only for that one time in the Olympics, including angling, motor racing, ballooning, cricket, croquet, as well as a 200-meter swimming obstacle race and underwater swimming. Also, these Olympics were the only one in history where live pigeons were used as targets during shooting events. I guess there was no ASPCA or PETA back then. This is truly a French Olympics. 72% of all the athletes that competed were from France and claimed the most medals. Athletes from the United States won the second most medals while fielding the 5th largest contingent. The signature event at the Olympics, as it is still to this day, is track and field. And the star on the track was American Alvin Kreislein. He was one of 2 people who have won gold in the 60-meter sprint race before it was withdrawn after the 1904 Games in St. Louis. He also won the 100 hurdles, the 200-meter hurdles, the long jump, and with his win in those events, he became the only athlete to win in these 4 events in one Olympics. Yet it was not without some controversy. And this was actually between team members. In the long jump, Kreislein defeated silver medalist Meyer Prinstein, his great rival from Syracuse University, by a single centimeter. Prinstein's mark had been set in the qualification round, and he did not attend the final because the finals were held on a Sunday. And since it was said that the two had an informal agreement not to compete on Sunday, and when Prinstein learned that Kreislein did show up, he became violent and allegedly punched his teammate, according to some accounts. Now, Prinstein would go on to win the gold in the triple jump, becoming the first Jewish athlete to win gold in an Olympic Games. Track and field events were held at the home of the Racing Club of France at Croix-Catalan Stadium. in Bois de Boulogne track. You say track, but actually there was no track there. It was just an open field. Races took place on an uneven field of grass littered with trees. It kind of reminds me of field day at my elementary school back in the day. The United States dominated the short distance events, taking 13 out of a possible 21 medals. Athletes from Columbia University, Princeton, and the University of Pennsylvania all won gold. The U.S. dominance in sprinting was matched in the middle distance and long distance track races by the UK. Only George Orton, who won Canada's first Olympic title in the shorter of the two steeplechases, ruined a perfect record for the British. Orton won his title less than an hour after placing third in the 400-meter hurdles. Meanwhile, in the field events, Hungarian discus thrower Rudolf Bauer was the only non-American crowned as Olympic champion. The American domination was even greater in the field events than the track events, with outstanding performances coming from Ray Erie and Irving Baxter. Erie started his Olympic career with a sweep of the 3 standing jumps, while Baxter finished second to Erie 3 times and won both the regular high jump and the pole vault. Meanwhile, in gymnastics, and only men perform gymnastics in these Olympic Games, a total of 135 gymnasts from 8 different nations participated in the competition that involved elements of gymnastics as well as track and field and weightlifting. During the competition that lasted just 2 days, the top 18 places were taken by French gymnasts, which made up nearly 2/3 of the participants. Gustave Cendrés claimed the title in the event, with Noël Baz finishing second and Lucien Demont finishing third. And just to let you know how saturated that field was with French competitors, the highest non-French finisher was Jules Ducret of Switzerland. With a result of a tie, with his result, he was tied for 19th place. Gymnasts performed 16 exercises, many of them being 2 competitions of the same discipline with 1 compulsory exercise and 1 voluntary exercise. There were a maximum of 20 points in each exercise, leading to a total maximum of 320 points. The events were mostly gymnastics in nature, but also included a number of athletic events and weightlifting competitions. There were the horizontal bar, the parallel bars and rings, along with a pommel horse and floor exercise, which is still part of gymnastics program today. But also there was the long jump, the pole vault, rope climbing, and weightlifting. The combined high jump required a jump over a rope that was approximately 4 feet above the ground and 3 feet, and you had to take off 3 feet away. The scoring standard for the long jump was 5 meters or 16.4 feet. For the pole vault, 2.2 meters or slightly more than 7 feet. The rope climbing featured a rope of 20 feet, and weightlifting used a 110-pound weight with 2 points for each overhead lift up to 10 lifts. Again, this was gymnastics of 1900. Over to the pool, or in this case, the river. In the Paris Olympics of 1900, the River Seine hosted the swimming events. Running with the river's current, the races produced very fast times by the standards of the day. John Arthur Jarvis of Great Britain, Frederick Lane of Australia, and the German Ernst Huppenberg each won 2 titles. Lane received a 50-pound bronze statue of a horse for a prize. Along with regular races, there were a couple of unusual events. One was the swimming obstacle race that required both swimming underneath and climbing over rows of boats, while Charles de Villeneuve stayed submerged for over a minute to win the underwater swimming event. So those were the Olympics of 1900. And just 24 years later, the Olympics were returned to the City of Light, making it the first city to host the Olympics twice. Opening on July 5th, 1924, the 8th Summer Olympics, officially known as the Games of the 8th Olympiad, opened in Paris. Now, these Olympics were the last to be officiated by Pierre de Coubertin, the father of the modern Olympics. Officially branded as Paris 24, it was in the running to host these games along with other great international cities such as Amsterdam, Barcelona, Los Angeles, Prague, and Rome. The opening ceremony was held on July the 5th, but some competitions had already started as early as the first week in May. The United States led the way on the medal stand with the most gold and the most overall medals, having only 229 athletes competing compared to France's 401. Key highlights of the games included the Uruguay national football team winning the gold medal in soccer, which was recognized as a world championship by FIFA. The opening ceremony and several sporting events took place in the Olympic Stadium of Cologne, which had the capacity of 45,000 in 1924. The Olympic motto, Citius Altius Fortius, or faster, higher, stronger, was used for the first time at these Olympics, and these were the first games to have an actual Olympic village. In 1924, the Paris Games featured 126 events in 23 disciplines comprising of 17 sports, and track and field, of course, was the centerpiece of these Olympics. The Flying Finns, a moniker given to the middle and long distance runners from Finland, led by the great distance runner of the 1920s, Paavo Nurmi, dominated the long distance running, while British and Americans dominated the shorter distances. Nurmi won the 1500 meters and the 5000 meters, which were actually held within an hour of each other, and along with the cross country run. Ville Ritola won the 10,000 meters and the 3,000 meters steeplechase while finishing second to Nurmi in the 5,000 meters and the cross country. Albin and Stenroos won the marathon, while the Finnish team with Nurmi and Ritola was victorious in the 3,000 meters and cross country team events. The British runners, Harold Abrams and Eric Liddell, won the 100 meters and the 400 meter events, respectively. Liddell refused to compete in the 100 meter dash because it was held on a Sunday and because he was an observant Christian. If those names sound familiar to moviegoers from the early 1980s, their stories were depicted in the 1981 movie Chariots of Fire. In addition, Douglas Lowe won the 800 meter competition. And speaking of movies, these Olympics were the first to have the standard 50 meter pool with marked lanes. And in the pool, the star was American Johnny Weissmuller, winning 3 gold medals in swimming and a bronze in water polo. After retiring, he would go on to play the title role in all of the great Tarzan movies of the 1930s and 40s. American history was also made in the jumping pit, as DeHart Hubbard became the first African American to win an individual gold medal in the long jump. The marathon distance was fixed at 42.195 kilometers or 26.21 miles, which it is today, which was the same distance run at the 1908 Summer Olympics in London. Harold Osborne won gold medals and set Olympic records in both the high jump and the decathlon in the 1924 Olympics. His 6'6" high jump remained the Olympic record for 12 years, while his decathlon score of 7,710.775 points also set a world record and resulted the worldwide press of calling him the world's greatest athlete. Fencer Roger Ducret of France won 5 medals, 3 of which were gold. In gymnastics, 24 men scored perfect 10s. Yes, you heard that right. 24 men scoring perfect 10s. 23 of them scored it in the now discontinued event of rope climbing. Albert Seguin scored a 10 and also a perfect 10 on the side vault. Ireland was given formal recognition as an independent nation in the Olympic movement in Paris in 1924, and it was at these games that Ireland made its first appearance in an Olympic Games as an independent nation. As stated earlier, the United States led the way on the medal table with 99 total medals, including 45 gold, while Finland finished second with 14 gold medals, and the host country finished third with 13 gold medals and 38 total medals. Beginning in 1896 in Athens, the Olympic Games for the most part have been contested every 4 years. But during the past 128 years, because of war, the Summer Games have been canceled 3 different times. In 1916, 4 years after the 1912 Stockholm Games in Sweden, the Olympics were slated to take place in Berlin, Germany. However, because of the events of World War I, Berlin had to wait 20 years to host the games, which would be the last for 12 years because of the outbreak of World War II beginning in 1939. In 1940, 4 years after Adolf Hitler oversaw the Berlin Games of 1936, the games were scheduled to take place in Tokyo, Japan, the first Olympic Games to be placed in Asia. Tokyo would eventually host the 1964 Summer Games that featured the famous athletes such as future NFL Hall of Famer Bob Hayes as he started in the 100 meters and future heavyweight champion Joe Frazier who won gold in boxing. World War II ultimately canceled 2 games. In addition to the 1940 Games in Tokyo, the 1944 Games were scheduled for London. Those games were eventually pushed to 1948, 3 years after the hostilities ended. Coming up after the break, now what would the Olympics be without a little controversy? Even these games, that is, as of recording time, they already have a little controversy thanks to the Canadian women's soccer coach employing a drone to spy on other teams' tactics. Can we say Olympic Spygate? The history of the Olympics are filled with controversies, some on the field, some off the field, and others with tragic results. We will highlight some of those controversial moments right here on your home for Olympic history, the Historically Speaking Sports podcast here on the Sports History Network.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today.
The Olympics, whether it is summer or winter, it is always highlighted by outstanding performances and effort. But Olympic controversies have become as identifiable as the Olympic flame. The 100 plus years of Olympic history, in addition with the world record times of imperfect tens and unforgettable performances, has been mixed in with its fair share of controversy. And one of the first major controversies happened during the 1912 Summer Games in Stockholm, Sweden. Now, at the time, one of the biggest and brightest stars of the American contingent was Jim Thorpe. He had starred in the early days of American football and was a gold medalist in these games in both the decathlon and the pentathlon. Yet after the conclusion of the games, Olympic officials discovered Thorpe had played minor league baseball 3 years earlier and was stripped of his medals. In solidarity, the silver medalist in the decathlon and pentathlon, Hugo Wieslander of Sweden, refused to accept the medals when they were offered to him. 70 years after the Games of Stockholm, the International Committee was convinced and ruled that Thorpe's disqualification had been improper. In those days, if no participant protested Thorpe's eligibility 30 days prior to the game's start, then he was eligible. Since that didn't happen, Thorpe's records were reinstated in 1983, some 30 years after Thorpe's death. Replica medals were presented to his children, and in 2022, the International Olympic Committee declared Thorpe the sole winner of both events. Now, one of the biggest Olympic controversies happened 24 years after the Stockholm Games, and it began shortly before the Games even began. In 1936, the Olympics in Berlin, in the year shortly before World War II that would ultimately cancel the next 2 Olympic Games, German leader Adolf Hitler saw the opportunity as an opportunity to promote his government and the ideals of racial supremacy. In fact, the Nazis went so far as to publish in their official newspaper in the strongest terms possible that Jewish and black athletes should not be allowed to participate in the games. Yet when the countries threatened to boycott, Hitler relented and allowed those athletes to participate. Now, one of those black athletes, of course, was Jesse Owens, who won 4 gold medals in those Olympics in the 100 meters, 200 meters, the 4x100 meter relay, and the long jump. Meanwhile, 2 Jewish athletes, Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller, were originally scheduled to run in the 400 meter relay, but were replaced at the last minute by Owens and Ralph Metcalfe. There were speculations that their Jewish heritage contributed to their decision to, quote-unquote, not to embarrass the German hosts. Hitler decided not to shake hands with the American medal winner Jesse Owens, and that had been widely interpreted as a snub of the African American. However, some commentators have noted that Hitler missed all of the medal presentations after the first day, and he only wished to shake hands with German victors. One of the most famous Olympic controversies took place during the Mexico City Olympics in the late summer of 1968. In the 200-meter final, American sprinters Tommie Smith and John Carlos finished first and third respectively, bringing home gold and bronze in the event. Australian Peter Norman placed second, and when the 3 men took their places on the medal stand for the medal ceremony, all 3 wore human rights badges, but Smith and Carlos took it a step further. The 2 Americans wore black socks without shoes, then lowered their heads and both defiantly raised a black gloved fist as the national anthem was being played, representing solidarity with black freedom movement in the United States. Now, this, of course, did not sit well with the IOC president Avery Brundage, who deemed it a political statement unfit for the, quote, apolitical international form of the Olympic Games, unquote. In response, Brundage ordered Smith and Carlos suspended from the U.S. team and banned from the Olympic Village. And when the United States Olympic Committee refused, Brundage threatened to ban the entire U.S. track team, and this threat led to the expulsion of Smith and Carlos from the Olympic Games. Meanwhile, the second place finisher Peter Norman was not just a bystander in all of this. Remember the human rights badges that all 3 wore on the medal stand? Well, it was reported that Norman was the one who suggested that Smith and Carlos wear 1 glove each. His actions resulted in him being ostracized by the Australian media and was reprimanded by the Australian Olympic Committee. He was not sent to the Olympics in 1972, despite the fact his times were good enough for him to qualify for those Olympics, though it is not clear if it was because of his role in the medal ceremony of Smith and Carlos. Then there was another less known controversy that took place before the 68 Games. Roughly about a month before the start of the Games in Mexico City, the government of Mexico had increased economic and political suppression against labor unions, mostly in the years leading up to the Games. In response, the Mexican government began to respond to the growing social unrest in the capital city. A series of protest marches gathered significant attendance, with close to 500,000 participants taking part on August the 27th, right before the start of the Games. Mexican President Gustavo Díaz Ordaz ordered police occupation of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, yet the protests continued. Using the upcoming Olympics as a backdrop, the students gathered in the Plaza de las Tres Culturas in Tlatelolco to call for a greater civil and democratic rights and show disdain for the Olympics with slogans such as, "We don't want Olympics, we want revolution." Now, 10 days before the Games began, the government ordered the gathering in the plaza to be broken up. As a result, 5,000 soldiers and 200 armored vehicles surrounded the protesters. Hundreds of protesters and civilians were killed and more than 1,000 arrested. At the time, the event was portrayed in the national media as the military suppression of a violent student uprising, yet, after analysis indicated that the gathering was peaceful prior to the army's advance. 4 years later, in 1972, the Games of Munich, Germany, of course, better known for, unfortunately, the 11 Israeli athletes that were killed by the terrorist group Black September. But there was another controversy during the game that ended one of the longest winning streaks in sports history, and consequently the most controversial finish to a basketball game, in my opinion, in the history of the sport. On September 9, 1972, the United States, riding a 63-0 record in the Olympics, seemed poised to win its 8th consecutive gold medal in men's basketball. Their opponents in the final were the Soviet Union, who the U.S. had beaten 6 straight times in the Olympics. The U.S. had once again cruised to the final, winning its first 8 games in the basketball tournament. With 3 seconds left in the gold medal game, American forward Doug Collins sank 2 clutch free throws after being fouled hard by a Soviet player to put the Americans up 50-49. Immediately following Collins' free throws, the Soviets inbounded the ball and failed to score. Yet the Soviet coaches passionately claimed that they had requested a timeout before Collins' foul shots. The referee ordered the clock reset to 3 seconds and the game's final seconds to be replayed. But before the clock was completely reset, the officials handed the ball back to Soviet guard Ivan Ideshko, who attempted a long length of the court pass to center Alexander Belov. The horn sounded as the pass was being released from Ideshko. The pass missed its mark and the American players began celebrating. In the midst of the celebration, however, the officials ruled that the game clock had not been set and a third chance was given to the Soviets. U.S. coach Hank Iver was furious and considered pulling the U.S. team off of the court, but realized by doing this, the U.S. would possibly forfeit the game to the Soviets. So deciding to comply, the U.S. was on the floor for the final 3 seconds for the third time. This time, Ideshko threw another long pass again to Belov. The Soviet center received the pass between Americans Kevin Joyce and Jim Forbes right near the American basket. Forbes and Joyce sort of backed away, not wanting to foul in that situation, and Belov laid it in the basket as time expired. The U.S. players were vehemently angry at the end of this and voted unanimously to refuse their silver medals. At least one team member, Kenny Davis, has directed in his will that his heirs are never to accept the medals, even posthumously. It remains to this day a possibility that the game officials were indeed bribed by the Communist Party. 14 years later, at the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, it was the matchup that everyone wanted to see on the track. The defending Olympic champion Carl Lewis was set to defend his crown against Canadian sprinter Ben Johnson, the then reigning world champion. The Olympic 100 meters have always been the marquee event in track and field events, and this time around in 1988, it would put the bet on who would hold the title as the world's fastest human. In this star-studded event, which included, in addition to Lewis and Johnson, was Linford Christie of Great Britain, Desai Williams, Calvin Smith, and Dennis Mitchell of the United States, Robson da Silva of Brazil, and Ray Stewart of Jamaica. After a clean start by all competitors, Johnson got out of the blocks quickly and gained the lead that he wouldn't relinquish. His winning time of 9.79, a new world and Olympic record, breaking his own personal best of 9.83 he set a year earlier in the World Championships in Rome, and claiming the first ever gold medal in the 100 meters for Canada. Lewis finished second behind Johnson with a 9.92, which was also a world record that was set 5 years earlier by Calvin Smith, who this day initially finished fourth behind Linford Christie of Great Britain. 2 days after the race, however, it was discovered that Johnson had used and tested positive for the banned substance stanozolol, a type of anabolic steroid, and was stripped of his gold medal by the International Olympic Committee. Lewis was then awarded both the gold medal and his time was recognized as a world record. Linford Christie finished with the silver, and American Calvin Smith was awarded bronze. 1 year after the Olympics, Johnson was admitted to using performance-enhancing drugs from 1981 to 1988, and the International Amateur Athletic Federation rescinded his world record of 9.83 from the 1987 World Championship. No runner would run a quote-unquote clean 9.79 100 meters until 1999, when Maurice Green clocked in that time in the World Championships in Athens. It has also been somewhat lost to history that Johnson may not have been the only one quote-unquote juicing in this event. During the 1988 Olympic trials, Carl Lewis had tested positive for ephedrine and other decongestants and appetite suppressants, which at the time were banned substances. Lewis in turn defended himself, claiming that he had accidentally consumed the banned substances. The U.S. Olympic Committee accepted his claims of inadvertent use, since dietary supplements he ingested was found to contain ephedra. Other Santa Monica Track Club teammates Joe DeLoach and Floyd Hurd were also found to have the same banned substances in their systems, yet were cleared to compete for the same reasons. The Olympics and controversies go hand in hand, and in both the Summer and the Winter Olympics. As of this recording, the Paris Olympics is going on with very little controversy, but we may see something. It's just a matter of time, because sure, after all, it is the Olympics. Coming up here on the Historically Speaking Sports podcast, we will wrap up part 2 of our Summer Olympic double episode. Now, when you think back on the 1992 Summer Olympic Games in Barcelona, for most people here in the United States, people will remember the Dream Team that dominated the Olympic basketball tournament. Yet, for me, along with the Dream Team, I will always remember what happened on the track. Specifically, what happened in the semifinals of the 400 meters and British runner Derek Redmond. According to the official Olympic standings of that race, he was listed as a did not finish, but what actually happened in that race became one of the greatest moments in Olympic history, as well as one of its most touching. That story coming up on this edition of the Historically Speaking Sports podcast, a member of the Sports History Network.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about the sports yesteryear, and so we're pleased to introduce you to Row 1, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings sports history to life. The Row 1 gallery features over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, and advertisements in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. Any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. It's your choice. In the Row 1 shop, you can pick from thousands of unique items that feature retro and historical backgrounds dating back to 1876. We have everything from clothing to phone cases to mugs, even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 for access to the full Row 1 catalog. When you buy from the gallery today, you can instantly save 15% on your purchase. All you have to do is enter the code SHN15 and your discount will be applied. That's SHN15. That's it. Simple. Save 15% off all your prints in the Row 1 gallery. Just go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. And don't forget to check out all the podcasts on the Sports History Network. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.
You are locked into the Historically Speaking Sports podcast, a member of the Sports History Network. And just a reminder out there, you could follow us on Twitter or X or Twitter X, whichever you prefer. You could follow us at Historically SP2, or you could also write the show with possible show ideas, or if you just want to just say hello. You can write to us at historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com, and that email address, once again, historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. And also, I would like to remind all of you sports history fans out there that we have a large variety of shows here on the Sports History Network, and you could check out. If you happen to like this show, and I cannot understand why you wouldn't like it, please check out this show that is a lot like this one called Hello Old Sports, hosted by the Newman brothers, Dan and Andrew Newman. Their show, like this one, highlights all sports. Both guys are very knowledgeable, passionate about sports and sports history. Their most recent episodes was the many firings and hirings of manager Billy Martin of the New York Yankees. This is one of their latest episodes. Please check that out. You remember Billy Martin, the manager of the Yankees during the 70s and 80s. The show, it was equally informative and funny and also very entertaining. So please give my partners a listen at Hello Old Sports right here on the Sports History Network. And now, back to the show. So this is the final segment of the show, and if you listen to the show on a regular basis, you realize, of course, that this is our shout-out segment, and this is where we highlight a moment in sports history that has been somewhat forgotten about, and we want to, at least for a little while, just between us, bring back and reminisce about. And in this case, however, a lot of people remember this, and it's one of the most memorable disqualifications ever, and you felt good about it. It was the semifinals of the 200 meters during the 1992 games in Barcelona. One of the participants of the race was British runner Derek Redmond. Now, Redmond had been one of the most notable track and field athletes to come out of Britain. In 1985, he broke the British record for the 400 meters with a time of 44.82 seconds. Redmond would later reclaim the record in 1987, besting the time held by Roger Black with a time of 44.5 in that year's World Championships in Rome. In 1986, Redmond would be a member of the 4x400 meter relay that won the European Championships, and the next year would bring home the silver medal in the same event. Prior to the 1992 Olympics, however, his best moment on the track was during the 91 World Championships, when the British 4x400 meter relay team defeated the heavily favored American relay team for the gold medal while running the second leg. However, despite all of the success that he had on the track, injuries plagued most of his career. In the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, he pulled out of the opening round of the 400 meters because of an Achilles injury. And heading into his appearance in the 92 games, he had endured a total of 8 different injuries. On the afternoon of the race, I was watching the track and field events on television with my dad, who, during his day, was a very good track athlete in his own right. And so we watched the semifinal race on television. Redmond, despite his myriad of injuries, was in great shape. It was in great shape and great form heading into the Olympics that year. In the first round of the prelims, he posted the fastest time of the first round and went on to win his quarterfinal race. Yet in the semifinals, he started off well, but in the back straightaway, about 250 meters from the finish, his hamstring tore, and Redmond limped a bit, then fell to the ground. As I was watching this with my dad, we both let out a simultaneous "ooh." And I can recall him saying after he pulled up, "Oops, well, looks like he pulled a hamstring from here." Now, in complete disclosure, I tore my hamstring once. It was one of the countless injuries I suffered during my very abbreviated high school football career. It is by far one of the most painful injuries that you could suffer. The pain on a scale of 1 to 10 for me was like 11 billion. And you're currently listening to someone who has had multiple knee injuries, ankle injuries, and broken fingers. As Redmond was writhing in pain, the Olympic medical staff rushed to his aid, carrying with them a stretcher. Redmond courageously got off the track and was determined to finish the race and began to hobble toward the finish line, which was about 250 meters away. At that moment, a man ran onto the track and began to help him finish the race. It was none other than Jim Redmond, his father. The elder Redmond had forced his way past track security, and with both men arm in arm began to limp and hobble and shuffle toward the finish line. The Redmonds finished the lap together as Derek was leaning on his father's shoulders for support. As they both crossed the finish line together, the huge crowd in Barcelona's Olympic Stadium gave the two of them a rousing standing ovation. As I was watching at home, I was very moved, and so was my dad. Officially, Redmond was disqualified due to outside interference. But did it really matter? The Redmonds were later the subject of several advertising campaigns, including Visa and Nike, and the subject of the IOC Celebrate Humanity videos. It was one of the most incredible Olympic moments over the last 40 years of the Olympics, and I had the privilege of watching it with my dad. When it was over, I looked back at him and asked, as a 19-year-old, "If that was me, would you have done that?" His answer, with tears welling up in his eyes, said simply, "I would have done it in a heartbeat." And sports fans, that will do it for this edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to give us a listen. This podcast comes to you from the Bill King Memorial Studio in the sports wing of TM4 Enterprises, located in suburban Atlanta in the shadow of Stone Mountain. To get more content of Historically Speaking Sports, you can check us out on Twitter X or at HistoricallySP2, or, it's easy for me to say, or you can send us a line at historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. And if you have not done so already, please subscribe to the show. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell your neighbors. Hell, tell a passerby on the street about us if you think they like sports history. And until next time, stay blessed, stay cool, and be the best at everything that you do. And it will make the world a much, much better place. Peace out.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.